Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown. This week we're going to be talking about one of our favorite franchises from up north, our fair friends from above the border in the Toronto Blue Jays. But before we get to that, I wanted to do something a little bit different this week. It's been a big week in baseball, and I think we'd be both doing ourselves and, everybody else out there a disservice if we didn't talk about some of the stuff that happened at the trade deadline this season. Just kind of want to make this a bit more of a regular part in the show and talking about what's happened in baseball this past week. And so we had a pretty exciting trade deadline, though I think people weren't expecting it quite to be the seller's market that it ended up being.
And we had a lot of teams involved in what was going on because with the extra wild card team that came in last year, there are more teams that have a chance, right? So that it makes sense that more teams will go for it. And so 6 teams from each league, now you've got the Reds participating and even the Cubs participating.
You basically saw the entire AL West participating.
Right. So I think that fans think it's watered down. I think it's great that you have more teams and new teams this year that are in the running, and some of the venerated old teams or the teams that were thought to be really good that aren't. They're not going to make it this year, and that's okay.
Some teams that everybody thought were going to be great this year ended up selling. The Mets sold. The Cardinals sold.
The Padres didn't do either.
Padres didn't do either, which I think makes sense for them. I think that's a team where you could just.
So they're good enough.
I think
I picked them to be very good this year.
I think you had a
surprised.
wacky year as the Padres, and I think that you might. It's probably better not to make any rash moves based off of what's been a weird year on all accounts, and buying at the trade deadline with your already not totally replenished farm system might not be the best idea.
Well, I this Soto thing with them still sort of looms large, as does Machado, because they've got players. I mean, Bogarts is going to be there for a long time. But are you really going to step up and pay Soto $500 million or something? Or this is the last run with these guys as they are constituted, and we'll take our chances next year.
And we don't want to sell out the bank, have it not work, have those guys skip town, and then now we got nothing.
Right, so somehow I think they feel like they're going to turn it around, and they're still under 500. I don't see it happening.
We'll be talking about advanced metrics a little bit later and stuff with some of the stuff in regards to the Blue Jays, but they're a team where their advanced metrics are just, if their bullpen just didn't find ways to lose games, they would be much better. But they're a team that's...
And they have a good bullpen.
But they've just constantly found ways to...
Right, they're one of those teams whose expected win percentage should be much higher than it actually is.
And another team that didn't sell was the White Sox didn't sell. A lot of people thought Dylan Cease was going to be on the move, and he ended up staying pat.
Well, they did give up Lance Lynn and Graverman.
He was an expected give up, and but they...
That's a messed up team.
Again, that's a team. Something went wrong with the vibes there on a level that can no longer be blamed on just Tony La Russa.
Or Pedro Grifol, who's the manager now, and there's some people that are calling for his head in Chicago as well.
But at this point, once you get to the second manager, it can't all be on the managers.
And if you go to the East, you've got the Yankees in last place or right there with Boston.
And if you talk to Yankee fans, you think this team would have 30 wins.
Well, at the same time, I think the Yankees are they have a better record, obviously, by far now than the Mets. But I think that they have the same no mojo. The leadership's weird. When Judge was hurt for that long time, I don't know who the leader is in that clubhouse. They have some guys in the team, like Donaldson that hang around. That just Bader doesn't look right. There's just a messed up team.
I understand. I do understand why Yankee fans are so displeased with Cashman, because the roster construction just feels bizarre.
I think it didn't work out. I mean, the same thing, right? You can say we say about the Mets. If all the guys in the Yankees, if Bader had his year, if Rizzo was close to Rizzo, if Aaron Judge was healthy, and if Domingo Germán would have been good the whole year like he was in the perfect game, if Severino didn't have a bad year, if they have a lot of guys in the Yankees that had they played closer to what we thought they could play at, they'd be right there.
It's just interesting that collectively it all happened.
Right.
The same with the Mets, because I'm sure you think one or two of those guys will hit that if. They'll not play well, but you can't think collectively the whole team's mojo just kind of goes, down.
And the Red Sox are no different. They didn't do anything one way or the other, and I think that was right for them, actually, in this case.
The Orioles made their move.
Orioles said, okay, we're going to go for it, and why shouldn't they?
Why shouldn't they? They're in a position to strike. Getting a guy like Jack Flaherty to come in and be a big game pitcher for them really could make the difference. And they're a team that's still going to be in it next year, and a guy like Flaherty could end up contributing to.
And a team that everybody talked about as possibly one of the great teams of all time in the first month and a half of the season, the Tampa Bay Rays, have been rather ordinary.
They did not have a good July.
They did not have a good July, and they've been rather ordinary. As the other teams in their division, you play more divisional games now.
Well, I think when you looked at the conventional thought about the Rays of like, this is a whole bunch of guys we've never heard of. No way they can hit like...
And they all hit home runs.
Right, the whole season. And now the long ball isn't coming quite as freely. So guys have guys like Yandy Diaz having an unbelievable year.
I think they'll bounce back and they'll be fine.
A really good team.
And they got Glasnow back, which is huge, but they lost McClanahan.
There was going to be some regression, you thought, with a team performing like that.
Yeah. So, and then the other team that we're going to talk about today that's vying for it are the Blue Jays. And I said before the season, I like the Blue Jays. I've always liked the Blue Jays. And I think I probably pushed their flaws aside a little bit too much.
Just a touch.
And that mainly comes down to the same thing when I look at that team going, okay, they can hit. And they're having a bad year from Biggio, and Bo Bichette, who's leading the league in batting average, just got hurt, and now he's kind of day-to-day, and they went out and got Paul DeYoung to replace him.
Who will be helpful because he's a much better defender than Bichette is. That is one of Bichette's weaknesses.
Noted Met killer, by the way, Paul DeYoung, so happy to have him out of the league. But
because him and Biggio, I think both of them aren't great defenders.
No, and Biggio's not having a good year.
No.
And you look at that Blue Jay staff and you think, okay, they got Kikuchi and they're getting nothing from Manoah. Chris Bassett's been very good. Kevin Gausman's been good. Barrios has been pretty good.
Right, you think you have enough pitching.
They have the bullpen. It's the same thing all the time with the Blue Jays. And of course, Jordan Romano's hurt at this very moment, so he is, one of the better closers. But I wouldn't say he's, top
but
two.
But you know
or
what?
three.
We would have said this about the Philly bullpen going into the postseason last year. So you might be hoping for that kind of catch fire.
And they added some bullpen arms, and Stewart is pretty good. I watched them yesterday hang on against the Red Sox in the ninth inning, and so I got to look at all the. And by the way, the Blue Jays are very tall as a team. So there's a lot of tall guys.
Let's go into the Blue Jays, and we can end a little bit of Mets talk about the wild moves that they've now made. Especially considering last time we were here, we said that they wouldn't make some of those very same moves.
Very, very, very much so. So 47 seasons for the Blue Jays. So they came in 1977, and that's kind of hard for me to believe. I guess I was in high school then, or getting out of high school that year. And the Blue Jays have just about a 500 record as a franchise. I think they're 17 games under 500 for their history. So that's essentially 500 with 3,600 wins.
499 winning percentage.
Exactly. So they've won two pennants, as we know, and in those 2 years they won the World Series both of those times. In fact, they're one of, I think, only two teams to have won their two multiple World Series appearances, have won them both and never lost a World Series. But lots of singles teams, but teams that win two. The 9 playoff appearances in 47 years, I guess that's okay.
The problem with me with evaluating statistics is without knowing how other teams perform, it's really hard to say, because I imagine that making the playoffs year in and year out is something that only a few franchises really do, and we let our perception of those franchises kind of skew our perception of what a team should be. Should a team really be the Braves or the Yankees, where they make the playoff every single year for 15 years straight?
And really, what does it mean? So I think, and just looking at the Mets for a second. So any team that was where the Mets were, they think, okay, we could put together a run and maybe make the playoffs. And the Red Sox and the Yankees, both of whom were over 500, legitimately could say, yeah, we're 4 or 5 games over. We go on a winning streak. We can. But making the playoffs now is, all you want to do is get in. You got to have a chance to win if you're going to really take it seriously.
Now, I think now, in comparison, when you look over the Blue Jays' 45 years of history, making the playoffs time probably isn't as bad as it looks, because it's still, actually a pretty good percentage when you think about it. They make it about once every 4 years.
Right, 4 or 5 years. But now it's going to be even less important, right? Because more teams make it
more regularly, because more teams make it in. So I think that's something you kind of have to evaluate. That's going to change in how you look at a franchise's sort of overall history. And
so we know the Blue Jays are I think they call it blue, red, and white. So it's not red, white, and blue. And in fact, all the Toronto teams, all the pro teams in Toronto are red, white, and blue, or blue,
it's
red,
color
and white.
Scheme.
So the pro hockey team, the football teams, the Raptors.
Now, did they start off in the Sky Dome?
They did not. They started out a place called Exhibition Stadium.
Was it an outdoor stadium?
It was an outdoor stadium.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I think initially, and I don't remember this, they would play. They would try to delay the start of the season in Toronto. Maybe play their first home series a week or two later than everybody. I remember the season didn't start till first week of April at that time.
Right,
the way it is
still,
now.
You would try. They might not play their first home series until the third week of the season if they could avoid it. Maybe.
Right. So the now it's called the Rogers Center, I think, the ballpark, but it's called Sky Dome for years.
So that's the same stadium. They've just renamed it and updated.
Right, because Rogers owns, I think, owns the team, and so Sky Dome opened in 1989. Okay, so obviously you were just around to see that. You didn't really know anything about that, and it was a artificial turf ballpark, so that had that aspect of it. And I remember that it had a hotel.
That was a big aspect
attached to the ballpark,
like actually part of the ballpark.
And players, including Hall of Famer Roberto Alomar, who played for them at the time, lived in the hotel instead of having an apartment. He just lived in the hotel the whole season.
I mean, I could see why that would be pretty handy for a player.
You're 20, 5 years old or whatever it is. And you're somebody. You don't have stuff.
You're Roberto Alomar, so you're not even from. It's not even like you immigrated to the United States. You're now in Canada, so you're now removed to a third culture. And so, I'll just stay in the ballpark. I get the food here. I play baseball. It's pretty simple then.
And I remember Robbie Alomar, because I followed this at the time, was engaged for a while to the tennis player Mary Pierce, who had won the French Open. And Mary Pierce had French, and she grew up in Florida, so she wasn't, only French. She had spent a lot of time in the U.S. And they had this relationship. So thinking about a baseball player and a tennis player and their schedules, well, it didn't last. I don't really know what the reasons were. I don't really matter.
It's pretty tough because anytime he's playing, she's probably playing.
Exactly. So, being an artificial turf, park in that division, right? There weren't
certainly set you apart.
They didn't have any other teams on artificial turf until Tampa came in.
Right, but that
was 20 years later. So, and they started out and they were bad the first 6 years, as most expansion teams are. And we'll kind of go through. When you look at I think the best player by WAR on the 1977 Blue Jays, it was a guy I had never heard of.
Right. It's never good when it's like, oh, that was the best player year.
This guy named Ed.
Now, granted,
he was our best player.
It was by WAR. Sometimes, a player would be on the team and just missed out by, a tenth of a WAR or something. But it's still interesting because, going through the history of the Blue Jays, it really surprised me that Clemens played for them as late as like the late 90s. I thought he was like, I didn't remember that. I thought he was like, because I knew he wasn't on the World Series team.
No, that was before 92 and 93.
I didn't think he was there that late, but that actually kind of makes sense because the World Series teams, that was only like 4 years later.
And so you say that because from 1985 to 93, so they were bad for those first 6 years. They won 5 division championships in 9 years, and that's when you had to win the division because they didn't have any wild cards.
So when they really became good in those teams, were they a hitting team? Were they a pitching team? Was it kind of a...
Well, we'll talk about... I always talk about Dave Stieb when I talk about that. So, obviously the greatest player by WAR for the Blue Jays as a pitcher, which is a little bit unusual. They were a team of mashers, I thought, and they had...
That's certainly always been the idea of them I've had because the teams through the early 2000s and the 2010s sort of had a similar build and makeup.
And it's funny, you think I would remember all the players on that particular team, but certainly I remember Alomar being on that team. I remember that was before.
It was Joe Carter.
Joe Carter, obviously, with the famous home run in the World Series to win the World Series.
Olerud, was he on those or was that before?
I think Olerud was there, and he obviously had that 1 year.
You might have even had Craig Biggio.
No, he only played for the Astros.
I thought he was a year for the
never played. I think he played his whole career. So Alomar, Candy Maldonado was on the 92. Joe Carter, Dave Winfield played for that team. So these are guys, and Pat Tabler, who was a fine player.
There?
McGriff was not there at that time. Actually, I thought the same thing, and he was already gone. And a great Toronto Blue Jay, Rance Molnix, because you never heard about it. What a great name, right? You remember a name like that. So they have really solid players. Their pitchers were David Cohn, Al Leiter, so the Mets north a little bit. Jack Morris pitched for that team,
right?
Which is he was 37 though, so he wasn't necessarily
an aged Jack Morris.
Exactly. Jimmy Key You may know Jimmy Key, good left-handed pitcher, pitched for the Yankees.
Who was their key reliever?
Oh, boy. I think it might have been Pat Henkin and Tom Henke. Tom Henke was their closer. He wore glasses. And so at that time when a lot of guys didn't do that, and you think, wow, you know.
It was like big.
Yeah, it was like intimidating in some way, like a guy with glasses like that. So David Wells was on that on the pitching staff. So I was probably wrong in that, you know, they were a good hitting team. That looks like a better pitching team to me than it does a hitting team. Yeah, when I think about that. And so they won the 2 World Series after winning 5 and 9 years through that period. And they went to the championship series every year from 91 through 93. So they made it all the way, won the World Series in 92, 93, and then the strike year happens. They don't get a chance in 94.
And then the Yankees rise.
Yeah, in 95. And so that was kind of signaled the end of their...
Right, and then the Yankees rose, and then the Red Sox and the Yankees sort of ran that division, and the Blue Jays were always the 3rd best team.
Well, at best.
At best, at that time.
So
sometimes they would jockey with the Orioles.
So after 1993, and this is probably hard for Blue Jays fans if they don't even think about it this way, they didn't make the playoffs for 21 consecutive seasons. So remember we said they have it every 5 years? So that tells you that when they made it, it was packed in a tighter time period because they had a 21-year period where they didn't make the playoffs at all. I mean, wow, that's really difficult. And it was always weird, like the players going to Toronto because you had the impact of the tax laws in Toronto, and so how much are they keeping? You need to pay them more when they go to Toronto because of the tax laws. The players weren't keeping as much. That was a deterrent.
Because you would have to offer players, you know, overall larger contracts because they wouldn't be getting paid the same. If you offered a player playing in New York $60 million, he would not be getting the same $60 million contract a guy in Toronto would be getting.
Exactly. And of course, Toronto was the place. I'm pretty sure it's the place where Winfield killed the seagull. Right?
Now, Toronto, I think today it's probably a lot easier to sell players on the idea of going to Toronto. It's a very metropolitan city. It's going to feel no other than you're in Canada. It'll be like you're living in New York.
It's Canada's national team, and I'm sorry, Expos fans, because they keep teasing you with another team. Although I'm still not aware enough or convinced enough that Montreal would have. It didn't work there the first time. Ultimately,
it seems weird it would work there a second.
Is that a baseball city? You know, I don't know.
Maybe Ottawa would. You know, but even then, that's so close to Toronto.
I kind of feel the same way.
And I don't think they're too likely to put one out on the West Coast just because it becomes a travel nightmare then.
So here's a good one that I found out. So Frank Thomas, the Hall of Famer Frank Thomas, hit his 500th home run for the Blue Jays.
Right, because he went to the Blue Jays late in his career.
Yeah, obviously. So and I think 500 is a pretty good number to have.
Oh, yeah.
And to think he did it in a Blue Jay uniform, you want to get somebody in a trivia question.
Didn't Mo Vaughn play for them too?
I don't think so. He played for the Red Sox and Mets, but not there.
Still got it.
And the other thing about the Blue Jays was attendance, right? So before they're before the Rockies, obviously, and the Rockies have the all-time single-season attendance record. But the Blue Jays drew 4 million fans well before the Rockies were even born. And I think the Blue Jays' 93 attendance of 4,057,947 stood as the American League record for 12 years until the Yankees broke it in 2005.
That's pretty cool.
So the Yankees drew 4 million, and of course New York's a lot bigger city than is Toronto. Toronto's a big city. There's
Toronto's a very
4
big
million
city.
people, live in Toronto. So, but yeah, the Blue Jays and then the Rockies, I think, have the all-time record. So attendance was always a big thing about how much they supported the team, and when they were at their best,
everybody remembers that shot of Jose Bautista. Joey Bats hitting that huge home run against the Rangers.
That was a playoff game. Yeah.
And Rogers Center just going absolutely ballistic.
When Joe Carter hit the home run in 93, it was ridiculous. I mean, I was watching that game, and just, the guy running around the bases with his arms above his head, the all-time hit the game-winning home run in the bottom of the ninth to win the World Series. Are you kidding?
That's what you like. Every single kid that plays baseball, when they go into their backyard and they play whatever made-up baseball game that they're playing, because every kid does it. You did it too. You and your buddy are playing baseball, even though it's the only two of you. The truest definition of backyard baseball. It was always the walk-off home run in Game 7 of the World Series.
Like Bill Mazeroski.
That's what you dreamed of.
They send you to the Hall of Fame for that stuff. It didn't work for Joe Carter that way. The Blue Jays also have the largest geographical home market in all of baseball because it encompasses all of Canada, right? So it's the whole country. The radio stations are pretty small, and one of the things that is not I'm not liking about the Blue Jays right now is they are one of only 2 teams that do not send their radio crew to announce games on the road. Mm-hmm. So they're doing it from the stadium or wherever they do it in the local setup and watching a remote broadcast. They're not sending the radio crew with the team to follow the team to be there to do the radio on the road. And I think that's really awful and cheap, personally. And I'm not the only one that thinks this, right? So, how much money are you really saving by not putting these guys on a plane?
I can't imagine. I mean, I'm sure the radio guys are professionals. They're really good. But there's no way they can deliver as good a quality of the product watching the feed that they could deliver if they were at the game.
And it isn't just that. It's you're on the road with the team and you run into Kikuchi and you talk to his interpreter and you start talking to him at the ballpark before the game and you're on the air and you're doing the story about, I ran into him in the locker room this afternoon, and he said this kind of stuff can't happen if you're not there. You're not running into him in the locker room. So I think that's for a
really
team
isolates those guys.
Yeah, for a team that has got all of Canada as its market, even more reason for them to send the team there. So let's take a look at the best players on the Blue Jays because it really is revealing about what was going on.
Going through the years, it's super interesting.
So like I said, they're 47 years, the first year, and so somebody named Garvin, Jerry Garvin. You got him. Okay.
I looked about now. Just so this is the top overall player, pitcher or batter by B-Wolf.
I have no idea what he did. This is a 54 and 107 team, so they lost a lot of games.
Not good. But yeah, so he was their best player the first season. He got 3.6 WAR.
Yep.
And I think that's just common for a new team. And
3.6 that's an okay year.
Right. A solid year. Most people would describe.
And next year, the top WAR guy was 2.7, so it even went down, and they lost. They won a few more games. They won 5 more games, but. So it takes a few years before you see a name, come up that you recognize.
Because when you look at the years, the first 3 years you have different people. The first 4 years you have a different person. It isn't until year 5 where somebody starts showing up a little bit more consistent.
Well, and that's because you had draft picks, right? You were bad the first few years. And so Dave Stieb comes in, and he is, as I said before, the all-time leader in WAR. And for the next 4 seasons, he was the leader in WAR as Toronto ended up becoming a winning team in his 3rd season with the team, and they won 89 games in the next 2 years, and so he was their best player by a good margin at 7 WAR.
Exactly, because even his first season where he was the best player on the team, they were still dead last in the AL.
So then names that you won't know, I can name. So for Blue Jay fans, Jesse Barfield, what an arm in right field. Now, really nice offensive player, but the guy had a cannon out there and ended up moving around on that. But he for 2 years was the best WAR player. And then Jimmy Key kind of snuck in there, and I told you how I liked him I saw Jimmy Key in a golf outing one time. So he's a left-handed pitcher, and he's playing, and he hits the ball right-handed. He hit the ball like 310 yards, and I'm thinking, it's a pitcher. Why does he hit the ball so far? He's not even supposed to hit the ball at all. He's a pitcher. And then Hall of Famer Fred McGriff, 2 years. And unfortunately for Fred, he was gone sometime after 1989 because he wasn't on the World Series winning teams in 92 and 93. And I don't know if a lot of people would identify Fred as a Blue Jay. I would think Padres, Braves.
I think he gets credit
you think?
Because since of the accolades he got while he was on the Blue Jays makes him the subject of a lot of the only guy to win this in both leagues.
Okay. Right. He did that. And Dave Stieb sneaks in there again. Here, D. White, right? Devon White. He was an Angel center fielder for years. Really good defensive center fielder. Obviously came over to the Blue Jays. Alomar Olerud, right?
For their World Series years.
There's Pat Henkin. I told you he was a relief pitcher. And so there's a relief pitcher. And so that can't be he had an 8.6 WAR in 1996. For a relief pitcher? Is that even possible?
Are you sure he's a reliever?
He must have not been a reliever. I got to look at that for a second. No, he was a starter. I'm sorry. I'm wrong.
Oh, he was both.
Yeah, he did both. But at that time, he had to, because you can't have that kind of a WAR. And he won the Cy Young. That'll do it. Pat Henkin won a Cy Young? Wow.
You didn't know that?
I did not know. Well, yeah, you have an excuse. You were a kid. So,
Because he won in 95, looks like. Yeah,
96.
96.
Yeah. Wow. I really would have lost a bet on that. Roger Clemens, the next 2 years, was the number one WAR player.
Right, and this is sort of where my knowledge of the Blue Jays comes in, because then you have Clemens.
Well, you forgot about Sean Green.
And Sean Green, who was a later Met, or is that the other Sean Green?
No, that was Sean Green, who played for the Dodgers and the Mets.
Then you had Carlos Delgado come in, and that was sort of where my memory of them, comes over. That was the Delgado and the Roy Halladay.
Delgado
teams.
Hall of Fame to you?
Borderline.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Roy Halladay, Hall of Famer, obviously.
And he made a Hall of Fame. Now, here's a good one, though. So in 2004, the number one WAR player for a Blue Jay team that was 67 and 94, and this tells you a lot, was Orlando Hudson. And I got to give it to Orlando Hudson,
I
right?
think that was the year Halladay got hurt.
Well, I don't think that's why they lost 94 games, though.
But it didn't help.
No, it didn't help. How about Vernon Wells?
He was always a
really
guy,
good ball player.
But he was always a guy that they hoped for more from, I felt like. They always you were always waiting for Vernon Wells to really ascend and hit that next tier and become a true superstar. And he never quite.
Okay, career WAR for Vernon Wells without looking. What would you guess?
28.
Damn, you're good. 28.6.
Wait, really? Wow.
Woo! Very good. I'm impressed. And I agree that he was so good you expected him to be better.
Right. And that's what
I don't know if that's fair.
He had a lot of injuries,
Yeah.
and then he went over to the Angels, and he was just never quite the player that the Angels hoped he was going to be when they signed him to that contract.
I think Alex Rios who was number one in WAR the following year, and
Third baseman.
2007. Good ball player.
Was that before or after? I think that was before he went over to the Cubs.
Yes, I think so too. That was later in his career. Roy Halladay hangs around there, and then you mentioned Joey Bats before. He is number one in WAR in 2010 and 11. So, and then really good years for Joey Batista.
Oh yeah, then he had another great one a couple years later in 2014 before Josh Donaldson comes in.
So, Encarnacion, okay, we know him as a good player. But I know, how about this guy? Colby Rasmus was the number one player in 2012 for WAR for the Blue Jays. Colby Rasmus? Really?
Was that a strike year?
No, it wasn't. little. Josh Donaldson checks in after that. 2 years in a row, and really had some very good. He had an MVP year in there, didn't he? At one point, right? And one of those was an MVP year in 2015 or 16. Marcus Stroman, and he of the sort of not a strikeout pitcher, but managed to be the number one pitcher for the Blue Jays. And I think the Blue Jays still have a real affection for Marcus Stroman. I thought there was a pretty good chance he might have gone back there this year.
Had he not started flaming out
Yes.
like a month before.
Isn't that true?
Like, if he had literally pitched better for like a week or two longer, he might be a Blue Jay.
But it could be a blessing in disguise for the Cubs, right? Because I think a month ago the Cubs thought they were sellers or not going to do anything, and then all of a sudden they've had this sort of catch fire aspect of the game. They're in it.
And so you hope, okay, if Stroman can figure it back out again.
Right, Randall Grichuk, he also just got moved at the trading deadline, so that was not a very good team when Randall Grichuk was there. They were 73 and 89. Kevin Biggio in 2019 was their number one player, which I'm surprised.
But it's just really, I mean, that kind of tells
Another
you how weak
bad
that
team, right?
That was that he finished that year as their leader with 3 WAR. The next year, which was the strike year, Ryu was the team leader with 2.9.
The pandemic year.
In the pandemic year. But think about it. Pandemic year, he almost put up the same WAR that the guy
Right,
did
in 60 games.
In 60 games. And then Alex Manoah had a fabulous season last year.
Well, we forgot about Semien, and that was a weird thing, right? They couldn't keep them both, and you couldn't pay them. What Texas ended up doing that, but boy, I liked when he played for the Blue Jays. He was
Matt
excellent.
Chapman is, you know what? He's impressed me this year.
Yeah, he's in a contract year, isn't he? Right now,
Might be.
and Manoah, I just can't. That's why I think the Blue Jays have a chance. But I think the only chance they have if Manoah becomes the guy that he was last year again.
Exactly. Like Manoah just forgot how to pitch. Apparently,
it's unbelievable that a guy could, to have that at this young age, right? Because he's only, in his
but
early
you know what?
20s.
Sometimes guys just have a nightmare year. It does happen. I mean, look at teams have a nightmare year. Look at our Mets.
And we talked with Cooperstown Dave about Cito Gaston a little bit, a Hall of Fame, because he won the 2 championships in those 2 years, but and had a nice playing career.
Were there any other really notable Blue Jay managers?
There were a lot of guys that were managers, and if I named them, you wouldn't know Jimmy Williams. Jimmy with 1M Williams. I always thought that was weird. But no, not really. Charlie Manuel managed up there, obviously.
Well, they don't have any of like that known guy.
Buck Martinez,
being their manager.
No, and because they've had some really good seasons, 9 playoff appearances in 45 years, and we know they had a 22-year gap or 21-year gap where they didn't make it. So there's a lot of bad Blue Jay teams in there.
If you had to think about a position that the Blue Jays are known for, what would you go with? Because I kind of know what my answer would be.
Pitch.
Like a position, pitcher, any position.
Oh, I off the top of my head, I'd have to think a little bit more.
I think it's actually pretty easy.
I like first base with Olerud and McGriff.
Olerud, McGriff, Delgado, Vlad Guerrero Jr.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's the first thing that came to mind.
Like that you really think that is a quality array of starting first baseman that you've had there. You could also say, now the thing is that though he played this position, he hasn't been there long. Third base has also been pretty impressive for them. They've had a lot of good, solid, especially hitting third baseman, because Batista played a bit of third for them.
Molitor played up there.
Mm-hmm. You have Alex Rios, you had Matt Chapman, you had Donaldson. They've had a bunch of different third basemen that have been very good for them.
But it's just interesting about really good. But when you think about that, Hall of Famers wise, we know Halladay is in the Hall of Fame, and he played for them.
Did Alomar go in as a J?
Alomar, I don't know. I don't think he went as a J, but I'm not sure about that. So I'm just saying, who is identified? Like, you talk about the first baseman. McGriff didn't go in with anything. I think he didn't wear a cap. Olerud, not quite a Hall of Famer. Vlad Jr., if he were to make the Hall of Fame, he'd be a Blue Jay. But really, the only one.
Right. Or if Delgado makes it in, I think.
I think he'd be as a Blue Jay more than any other team.
It would either be him as a Blue Jay or a Met.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be as Met. I don't think he did enough as a Met.
He did way more as a Blue Jay.
I agree. 473 career home runs.
Right. He's the guy.
Ops plus of 138 for for Carlos Delgado. Boy, I got to tell you, that's
if he only had a reputation as a better defender.
Yeah, I was looking at a player like that too today that had I said, wow, why isn't he better appreciated? He must have Greg Luzinski, the Bull who played for the Phillies back in the 70s. I'm like, wow, he had 307 home runs. He batted 280 something for his career. He had an on base average of 360. This guy must have had a steel glove, negative 20.2. D-WAR. Okay, I remember him not being very good. So I think if I look at Delgado, and the career D-WAR is negative 17.2.
Right, and that's
you can't accumulate that all in like the last 2 years. It doesn't happen like that.
Because even if he was like a normal, like if he even had 10 less, if he was a negative 7 D-WAR guy, then he has 54 career WAR. He's probably in there, no problem.
But I think if there's one position you can really survive at having,
it's first base.
It's first base. Like, how much did him not being a good defensive first base really hurt the team?
I agree with you. He should be in there, but we're big Hall guys, so it's not surprising we think he should be in there.
So I don't. Do you think the Blue Jays have a chance this year? To get over the Rays and
they have the same puncher's chance that anybody has.
So make the playoffs.
You get hot. You have 2 months left. You could get hot, but the problem that they're at is they're basically at the stage where they kind of need to get hot any day now. Like, there's only so long that they can not get hot for.
I would say the Blue Jays are my favorite American League team, and that's mainly because they play in a division with the Yankees.
and really, unfortunately, you have the misfortune of playing in the AL East this year.
Right.
Because if you go play in the AL Central, you're a playoff team.
I'm a Met fan. I can't like the Red Sox. I can't like the Orioles.
Why can't you like the Orioles? Oh,
because it's a World Series thing.
Well, that thing for me, I'm fine like
you haven't been around for those.
Exactly. They've always sucked.
So they've never had to play the Blue Jays in a game that meant anything. So I can like the Blue Jays more than any other team.
And for me, they've never had to play the Orioles in a game that meant anything.
So hopefully we'll see them in the playoffs because I think they're a fun team to watch. That team can rake when they get going.
And Rogers Center is a great place for postseason baseball. I think it would be great for just watching the intensity of the games if they were played there.
Yeah. And the last I'll say about it, so Bo Bichette's hurt right now, and I went on this week and said, Arias is hitting like 377.
Right.
And so for him to have hit 400 this year right now, he would have had to go 95 for 200 for the rest of the year, batting 470 to bat 400. So obviously it's not happening, and everybody that's the point when saying that was it's so hard to do. Bichette was leading the league in hitting, but he's batting 328 or 321. He's more than 50 points behind Arias.
Right.
Arraez should get like plaudits for being that much better than everybody else.
Right. Hitting 380 is incredible.
When everybody else is hitting 320 in the other league.
It doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. Hitting 380 is incredible.
All right, so quick Met take here before we...
Yeah, so obviously last time we were here, we talked about how we did not think the Mets
would trade Verlander. He's gone.
And he's gone.
He's
gone. They made a whole bunch of moves, and they were the right moves to make.
It hurts Here's the thing: it hurts. Like we said, when they raised the red flag, the white flag when they traded Robertson, and then out went Scherzer. Like, I think they're selling. And then they sold everybody. Right, that Canna went and Pham went and all these guys went, and you've got a bunch of guys who shouldn't be playing right now. Which I'm still in the phase where I'm not really watching right now.
Right now, it's much easier as a Met fan now that they've sold because you can actually check out. You know now that the team isn't trying to compete.
And so, I thought it's not beyond the Mets to tank.
Oh, they are.
Because from a business decision, they said, look, the right business decision for us right now is to sell all the expensive players and to run the kids out there, and we'll be good next year or the year after. Maybe we'll sign some free agents, And so that what would go with that is, and we should lose every game that we can so that we can get the best draft pick. And you pointed out.
Right, because now the interesting thing with the Mets, because the Mets are so over the luxury taxer this season, one of the additional penalties that they're going to face is that their draft pick will be lowered, but it's protected if it's in the top 6 picks. So if the Mets,
they got to really stink the rest of the way to do that.
If the Mets finish with the 7th pick, it falls to 17, and everybody else under them just moves up one spot. But if they finish with the 6th pick, they keep the 6th pick. So in terms of the quality of player they're selecting, it is hugely different based on where they finish this season. So they have every incentive to continue trotting out lineups where DJ Stewart is batting 4th.
He's batting cleanup. DJ Stewart, they talk about, he is the replacement player.
But something that you talked about
literally,
to me, and I've always sworn that they wouldn't do, but he was. Pete Alonso was on the trade block.
Yeah,
Now, he commanded apparently a king's ransom, but they're clearly willing to move on from him.
I just thought that if they don't have a place for Vientos to play and they can teach the guy first base and they think they can get something for Pete, are they really going to pay Pete 8 years for $200 million? Because I think it's going to be something like that.
When you could potentially get similar production from another person.
Correct. So I hope that doesn't. I would like Pete to stay with the Mets.
Me too.
And so I don't want that to happen. But I think they're doing the prudent thing as an organization, going, how can we be better? And I don't think they're going to compete for a World Series next year by any stretch. But I think they won't be as bad as it looks like they're going to be right now.
Obviously, because one of the things everybody's like, they're going to be terrible next year. Obviously, Cohen isn't going to. He might not go out and sign a huge name pitcher. Though I could easily see them going out and trying to sign Yamamoto out of Japan. I could really see them making a run at him.
Shohei's not coming here.
Shohei's not coming.
Even if he offers him 8 years for $600 million.
You could sign Yamamoto and another mid-level starter and have a better than you'd think rotation. And then if some young arms work out in the bullpen, then you just have to hope that, unlike this year, all of your batters kind of return to what they are. And the only thing that you worry about
is somewhere in between.
Yeah, the only thing you worry about is, wow, Sterling Marte looks really old.
Right.
He looks old now.
And he will be here.
And he will be older. And Jeff McNeil looks like he's, until like last night, looks like he's forgotten how to hit a baseball.
I just want to see, as many of the young kids get a chance to play and play regularly, because I don't need to watch DJ Stewart. I don't need to watch Carlos Carrasco.
You need to watch Rafael Ortega.
I don't need to watch Rafael Ortega or even Arraez, whatever his name, Ruiz, the second baseman who came in, who was batting like 230 in the minor leagues.
You are going to have some nights, if you are a Met fan going forward, where you turn on the TV and you see the lineup and you will ask yourself, who are these guys?
No, you don't if you don't turn on the TV.